Okay, so you loved the monastery so much, you learned so much from it, you gained so much wisdom, and you were in a position there that you were out in the world, even in the monastery, and you were sharing that with other people and you were teaching. Why then would you want to leave?
Well, what you said there is the basis for why I eventually left. I was out doing things in the world as well as arriving back at the monastery to do my meditations and my studies. But I was out in the world, and I began to realize how much I needed the experiences of the world confronting me and challenging me in ways that I had not been challenged in the monastery. Ways that had to do with ego and insecurities and uncertainties and knowledge that I did not have that was different from spiritual knowledge and philosophical knowledge.
So are you saying that there were vices that you needed to overcome that you knew existed that you just weren't challenged enough in the monastery?
Yes, I realized that I had insecurities and uncertainties about how well I was doing and how successful I was and whether I was giving enough information to people or getting enough information from them in the work that I was doing.
You didn't consider, though, that you could work that out in the monastery?
No, I began to realize that I needed to study psychology or have a relationship with psychology to understand myself better. I was working outside in the world, and the self-study I was doing was spiritual and mystical, but it almost entirely was devoid of the egotistical and the psychological. And it was at that time that the monastic superiors began to hire psychologists for issues that were coming up. It was modern age, and so that happened, and I had a taste of psychology, and it was like, I really need this to find out why I'm at times insecure, or why I doubt myself, and why I'm afraid to speak up in this particular case. I need to understand that.
What were you insecure about?
As I've said before in earlier discussions, I think with you, that I was not as smart as I could be. My family portrayed us as stupid children. And when I was interested in getting higher education, everybody in my life, including my surrogate father, who I was very close to, dismissed it and diminished it, and were even offended that I would think of getting higher education.
So at this point in your life, when you realized you had those vices and those things you wanted to work on, what gave you the idea, if you even had it at all, that they could be fixed? Because I feel like a lot of people have problems like that, and they're just kind of like, well, this is who I am. So it sounds like you're saying you knew you could fix them or overcome them. Is that true?
Yes, I did have some experience with priests who were also getting into psychology themselves. Not only studying theology and philosophy and getting ordained as priests with a lot of education, but also studying psychology and actually becoming psychologists. And so I had some experience with that in the late 60s, and I was delighted with the understanding, the insights I could get into myself through psychological principles and techniques.
So it was kind of a gradual thing. You were introduced to psychology and you were like, hey, I want to do that, as opposed to just waking up one day and being like, my time here is done.
Well, I thought in the beginning that might be the way it is, that I'm put in my time in the monastic life and I've got everything. Everything's right here, if that's what you mean. If that's what your question means.
I just mean when people make big changes in their lives, it seems like it's a more gradual kind of awakening thing rather than you just wake up one day and you realize I'm done. So what I'm asking is, was there any day that you woke up and you were like, all right, my time here is complete, it's time to move on? Or was it kind of like subtle things that you would notice and you kind of were interested in that?
It wasn't a day, but it was over a short period of time that I began to realize and then accept. That was big, because leaving the monastery is not an easy thing in the Catholic Church. Once in vows, you're dedicated to the finish.
That's what I was going to ask. When you knew that your time there was done, was it kind of scary? Or were you kind of, I don't know, did you reject that at all?
No. I just was sad about it because the life I had lived and the learning I had acquired there was so good. I was sad that I would need to give that up, and I was worried that if I did leave, I wouldn't maintain the most important aspects of that life that catapulted me into the joy that I was appreciating. The reading, the spiritual reading, the chapter of faults, the study of philosophical principles, the meditations, the long nights in prayer and quiet.
Was it not your goal going in, though, to see through the delusion of it?
Not really. My goal in going into it was to discover the meaning of life, the answer to the big questions. I didn't realize the breadth of what that would be and the impact it would have. Couldn't realize that at the time. I just knew that that's what I wanted, and I just took the first bite. I didn't realize that there would be big bites to come that would take me to a variety of places. That there would be a breadth to it as well as a depth.
Yeah, were there ever times that you learned something from the Bible or someone else in the monastery that you just didn't agree with?
That was always the case. There were teachings that we could not prove. The Bible can't be proven. It's a constellation of 72 books or writings, and some of them very extensive, that virtually nobody knows about where they came from. So right from the start, the foundation of faith is based on something that has no basis in experience. Nothing. I could have had a fantasy and said, hey, this is the way things are because I had this fantasy. And people believe me and say, wow, hey, let's start thinking that way and behave that way because of what he said. And that was always lurking. And I know it wasn't just for me. It was always lurking for many in monastic life. And I know that many left because of it, because there was no certainty. And that religion was a way to grow and to learn, but it also carried with it, most religions do, carried dogma with it. You must believe this and you must believe that about things that could not be proven, and many of them that did not even make sense. And so my whole life, my evolution in the monastery was very much like the evolution of knowledge through history, from superstition to philosophy to psychology to science. And my whole life, my few years there, were taking that course, going from the superstition end to the factual end to the evidence-based end, more and more. And psychology added that component to it. It was a evidence-based discipline. Adding that to the philosophy and theology that I knew that was good, that made sense. Now I've got a package that I can rely on and a platform I can springboard off of.